I'd like to welcome David House, Executive Director, and David Dower, Artistic Director of ArtsEmerson. Friends, I see you. Can you unmute yourselves? Do we need, you got it? Hello all.
Hello.
Hello. And did I lay out your titles properly?
I think so.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, friends, for joining us. And I don't know if the governor's announcement yesterday, has you all scrambling, changing plans, new thoughts. So whatever you are comfortable sharing today, we'd be happy and privileged to hear it. But for those of us, right, the big question: what are the priorities? What are each organization's priorities, and specifically, what are ArtsEmerson's priorities in sort of pivoting towards reopening and what we're doing?
Sure. David, would you like to start? Or
No,
you want to get started? Great. So first of all, thank you, Dawn, for inviting us and having us to share a few of our thoughts with colleagues across the city and beyond. My name's David House, and I am the Artistic Director. And for those of you who do not know, ArtsEmerson is one of Boston's leading presenters of contemporary world theater, dedicated to connecting communities through stories that deepen and reveal our connection to each other. So in many ways, what's that?
Well done.
Yes. And he's David Dower. I'm just going to speak with him. He is our artistic director, and we have the privilege of working together to run ArtsEmerson, which is the entity that most people know of, but we also have the responsibility of running the Office of the Arts, which is a larger sort of parent company, for lack of a better word, that houses both ArtsEmerson and HowlRound, which I hope you know about. And then we also are responsible for managing the theater spaces for the college and returning those to public-facing use. And so we manage the rental of those spaces externally. So it's multiple lenses through which we have to view the work. But I know that a lot of what we're experiencing and feeling is shared by many of our colleagues. Many of us have been on these calls and heard sort of the challenges and hopefully hearing some of the promise. I heard someone speak about this moment. It's both painful and promising. And so we like to both acknowledge the pain, but also recognize that there's opportunity here. And so hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that today. So what are our priorities? I would say three things. One, the people. So we have really spent a lot of time over the last 5 years, I would say, of really putting our team, our people first. And so that hasn't shifted. In fact, we've actually leaned more into that as a priority as we looked toward the current situation and looked toward the future. So thinking about the people has been and will continue to be a priority for us. We also are prioritizing our values in this moment, knowing that in challenging times, some of the things that you value are the first, or let me rephrase that, some of the things that we say we value are the first things that go. And so we've been very much prioritizing our priority values. And the third thing I would say, and then would sort of lean into David to share other priorities that surface, is really the culture. Because we understand that, as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so really thinking about what is the culture and how do we maintain the integrity of that culture even while we are in different places. Certainly we are prioritizing safety and the effort to reimagine, not necessarily urgency to recover and be open, but really to reimagine what our future might be. And so we've been spending a lot of time, both the two of us, but also with our teams, to think about what it means to reimagine and what is the future we envision. What are the things we want to bring through this pandemic, and what are the things we want to leave behind? So I'll pause there. And David, what other priorities are we thinking about that I may have missed?
Well, I just, my lens is so often through the programming. And so the priorities in the programming that are building on that priority of our, working from our values and keeping people first. we have the benefit of having this term connection in both our values and our mission, our purpose statement. And so we were able to kind of follow that word in our pivot online, and have been prioritizing there the opportunities to connect, not just ArtsEmerson to its potential audiences, or maintain that connection with the audiences, but to connect the audience to the artists and the audience to each other, which those types of connections are very important reason for being for us. And so understanding that the digital series as an opportunity to connect in all three dimensions that way has led us to kind of thinking about what's the digital future, what's the, how do we reimagine this reimagining thing, just really quickly, for those of you who haven't heard us talk about it, it's really been an important framework. And if you're still struggling for how to organize what you're going through, there was this framework that was given to the arts community here through San Wang at the Bar Foundation early on. Came from a presentation at Grantmakers for the Arts that the Seattle Arts and Culture Director did. And it was a 5-stage framework that it's not necessarily linear, it's iterative, but we've been following it in this sort of order. And just very quickly, those 5 stages were mitigate the problem, clarify the problem first, mitigate the problem, redeploy your resources around that problem. Then we got it wrong, David and I. So we're using it. The 4th stage is reimagine your way into the future, and then recover. And we did it wrong because originally it was presented as clarify, mitigate, redeploy, recover, and then reimagine. But once we realized we had done it wrong, it made sense to us that that's how we were doing it. We didn't have that much faith that if we recovered, we would take the time to reimagine. If we got back to normal, we just wouldn't actually make any progress on some of the things that have been wrong in all this time. And so part of our prioritization has been to say, we are going to move forward. We're not just going to go back to normal. We're going to go forward to the next normal. And so we've been using that framework to get us there. So the reimagination priority is a big one for me in the programming, in relationship to the artists, and in relationship to the audience and to our staff.
So then within that framework, and especially the reimagining, we talked a little bit about that in our prior conversation. How does that impact your approach to scenario planning?
Oh, scenario planning. Such a beautiful idea, right? Such a beautiful idea. Again, I'm not saying anything that most of the people on the call haven't experienced, but we set out with a set of scenarios and set of plans that were really robust and had timelines and had some numbers associated with them. This was in week probably 3. And we're feeling pretty confident. We had engaged a staff in that process and rolled that out and sort of keeping them involved. The one thing that you'll hopefully hear is that while David and I lead the organization, we don't do it alone. And we work very closely with a pretty wide group of our team members from across the departments to help us think about and challenge our thinking as we're thinking about the future. And so that scenario planning rolled out, and we realized very quickly that scenario planning makes sense when there's something that you can actually count on, or even when history informs the future. And we realized very quickly that the historical data that we had was helpful, but really not that informative as we were thinking about moving forward. And the fact that so much was uncertain as we were thinking about scenarios. One, when will you open? How many people can come when you open? Sort of what will the cost be? How do you navigate a dual purpose now with a live experience, but also coupled with an online experience? What skills do we need for so many questions and so few answers. And so we and our team, interestingly, kept saying to us, just tell us the worst case scenario. And I was like, I don't know if we want to talk about the worst case scenario. Because in really many ways, we know what the worst case scenario is, and it's hard to imagine, but we started to think backwards and think, okay, well, what is the worst case scenario? And let's touch it and let's reimagine. Let's not actually figure out how to get there, but let's figure out what we can reimagine. And that reimagination process was not one that was a clean and linear. It was basically setting out a vision. And we continued to say from the very beginning that we will reopen. And let's just be clear, while we are full of anxiety and uncertainty and fear, we will reopen. How we reopen is unclear, but we will find that space. We will get to the other side. And in that sort of vision, that very simple vision of we will reopen one day, we charged and challenged the team to begin to think about what a reopening might look like. Not only what will the programming look like, but what might your role look like? So David, maybe you can talk about our front of house staff and sort of what that reimagination looks like and how they began to play and toy around with the idea of something was actually quite comfortable. You know, we all as theater makers are, that is our purpose. And when you are removed from that purpose, the physical space of making that work happen, there is a sense of loss. And so then to reimagine that there may be a time for an extended period of time where you're not in that place can be anxiety provoking, but we're hoping that by reimagining it gives us something to hold on and to actually look forward to. And so part of the scenario planning is reimagining many different scenarios and then being prepared to adapt and move quickly, knowing that any one of them can change at any moment. And the governor's announcements yesterday were not a surprise and in any way. It was confirming, gives us more to think about, but it didn't actually necessarily shift anything significantly because we hadn't, planned on, opening in the fall. And perhaps we can talk about that as well. But David, maybe talk a little about the reimagining that's happening right within the team.
Yeah, I'd say two things. The first I would say is, to your question, Don, that the reimagination and the scenario planning go on simultaneously, and they infect each other. And that's why that framework, the recovery framework, is iterative, because as the scenarios change and as the facts on the ground changes, you've got to go back through that whole framework. And as we reimagine things, it changes what the scenarios are. Like, oh, we just discovered this thing that we can actually do. So you have to think of them as two, they're the yin and the yang of this moment. One is like blue sky and the other is like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? And so we're doing both simultaneously. What the staff is doing, David's right, we ask everybody to reimagine everything start from your own job, then your departmental role here in the organization, all the way through, well, let's reimagine the field. What is international presenting? What actually happens if we can't get anybody on an airplane ever again from China? And so we asked everybody to do that. And I would say on this, to everybody on this call, that is not everybody's strength. And sometimes that is terrifying to somebody to say, hey, just go blue sky. And so you want to sort of monitor how people are doing if you're going to ask people to reimagine their own jobs. I mean, you'll get all kinds of responses like, hey, what if we instead delivered Meals on Wheels for the next 6 years? And I was like, okay, we're not doing that. That would be different, but it's not ours to do. So people need different kinds of support to try to think like this. But it's been very productive. And so, like, for example, in our front of house, that's the ushers and the house managers. And when they started to work on this, we call them the guest experience team here. And so we ask, well, who's the guest? Where are they? And they're all online right now. And what's the experience you want to deliver for them? And wanting to deliver the same ArtsEmerson kind of feel and all the values-based, service that we do. And so they started to reimagine how ushers show up in a digital space. And if you come to any of our town halls or any of our live events, you meet our house manager first, and he does the little, rules of engagement, and you're going to be on mute until you ask a question. Yeah, he's sitting in a tie with his name tag on, but it's the whole thing. So and then the box office is starting to imagine itself as the concierge for the digital service. So people who are at the last minute having a problem about, I don't know how to get on that link, or I never got the email, they call the box office, and there's somebody at the box office who can help them get online every time, and right up through the whole event. And so just rethinking on that small level, like right now in the digital world, is leading to then larger thinking about, well, what will it be if we come back and we're socially distancing and everybody's in gloves and masks? Well, what do those gloves and masks look like? How are they part of the event, and how do they feel good? Not like, oh my God, you're taking your life in your hands to come to this show. So that's what everybody's working on. Our production team, for example, is learning how to engage the production questions of the online program, and then how to carry all that learning into a return to live what kinds of capacities do we want in the theaters to capture and live stream the work as we're going forward as well. So everybody, the development office, everybody's thinking about, what's different going forward that's better, not just an accommodation to the challenge.
The other group of people who are sticking in with us are some of the funders. And so one of the joys of our work is being able to provide some artist residencies for our various artists. And there was a moment when one of the funders, a very loyal and generous and a thought partner, really, one of the funders came to us and said, do you want to rethink sort of this artist residency effort in this moment? And we said, we actually want to reimagine what it looks like. So we can't perhaps invite people into our physical space to sort of do the technical residency or the writing work, whatever they need. But maybe there's something that they need in this moment that we haven't actually discovered. And so can we actually take some time to talk to the artists to understand what they're challenged by in this moment and what is their needs are, so that we can actually step in that way. And so kudos to the funder who has said, okay, yeah, go for it. Try to reimagine. We'll figure out how to come up with a proposal that makes sense. But we really appreciate that the opportunity, which goes back to the promise of the moment, to really think about what it is we want to see differently in the future and how can we create that together in this very sort of moment of uncertainty through this reimagination and scenario planning phase.
Yeah. Can I do one other kind of context, guardrails around this whole notion of the reimagination and what we're doing at ArtsEmerson? There's another little two-part question that we ask ourselves all the time that we've continued to ask ourselves through this. And this came from a strong supporter of ours, Jackie Lindsay. And what we were saying, if we're just working in the gaps, because originally ArtsEmerson was going to be programming in the gaps. And then, well, how does that give you any direction at all if you're just looking for things that would not otherwise be in Boston? And so she gave us this formulation, which was, is it to be done? Meaning, is the idea, in programming terms, when we talk about this show, is this a show that's to be done? And then if so, is it ours to do? And so when we're talking, for example, about the residencies, well, residencies are to be done, and they are ours to do in the sense that they connect our audience to our artists, and they provide a kind of deeper opportunity for equity, and they put the world in the world cultures in our programming. That's something that we actually do. And so then, if it's to be done, and if it's ArtsEmerson's to do, now let's reimagine it. So we're not just like starting from out nowhere. There's actually something that's walking us to the set of considerations that we're focused on right now.
Thank you for that. So I think actually a lot of that conversation sort of touched on my next question, which was the idea of what do we want and how do we assess our values and what does getting back to normal look like? Right, just to tease it out a little bit.
Getting back to normal to me looks like a failure. It looks like not having learned. And we're not going back to normal at ArtsEmerson. We're going forward to the next normal. And it's, sorry to jump on you there, Dawn.
No, I love that's what I wanted.
How do you really feel?
How do you really feel?
And I say it, I don't know how many of you have lost people. I've lost people, and there's struggles all around in this world. And if what we do with all of that struggle and all the struggle in front of us is to get back to normal, we have failed the future. We have failed our community. And so let's stop talking about getting back to normal. Let's start talking about creating a better normal.
Yeah, and I think I heard someone say, this rush to get back to the good old days. And I keep reminding myself that the good old days were not good for everybody. And we have an opportunity to actually make it good and better for more people. And so what needs not to be lost here in this moment of clarity and sort of uncertainty is the exposure, once again, of the inequities that exist all across, all the platforms, all, our society at writ large. And how do we then think about how we shift that and not go back to where we were privileging certain art over other arts, the whole funding way that money moves, all that has to be reimagined. And so if we can figure out how to do that and do that together in alignment, I think we'll be better positioned.
Sorry, so What was your question going to be?
That was really the question, that idea
Okay.
of how are you teasing out that idea of getting back to normal? What does that look like? Or have you dismissed it entirely? So just, I think, dovetailing a little bit on some of what you've said then, right? Values, looking at getting back to normal and realizing that it's not equitable. It was not, back to normal is not great for everybody. We also spoke a little bit about healing. And sort of healing among the different pockets of our sector, and how we might work together to strengthen the community. That this moment is a collective call to action. Can you speak a little bit about your feelings on that?
Yeah. Some of you know, I was at the Boston Children's Chorus for many years prior to coming to ArtsEmerson. So I've been in sort of the arts and culture field sector here in the city for a very long time. And I think I, like many others, have been really hungry for a collective voice, not, necessarily sector, theater voice or museum voice or, musical voice, but really an arts and culture voice. And that sort of speaks and is aligned in what we are seeking to change and seeking to accomplish here in the city. And we have really great resources. I see Catherine here on the line with Arts Boston. We've got Mass Creative, and Emily's doing an amazing job. We've got the City of Boston, all those other efforts. And I think this, for me, feels like a moment to actually try and do a better job. As a community, as an arts and culture community. I've been really encouraged by the effort on behalf of the museums to align sort of their thinking, to align sort of their strategies around sort of their decision and announcement to close, but also thinking about how do they reopen, not necessarily on the same day, but it's sort of in the same sort of time frame. That sense of collaboration can serve as a model for the greater community. And so for me, it's not easy, because again, what we see is that we are all struggling in different ways. We're all in the same storm, as it's been said. We're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. And I'm hoping that we can figure out how to sort of get closer, put our boats closer together, right? Mm-hmm. And think about what can we learn in this moment of incredible destruction, both from an economic standpoint, but also a health standpoint. What can we learn, and how can we figure out how to come together in this moment for the good, not perhaps of our singular organization, but for the good of our ecosystem? We often talk about the role that arts and culture have to play in our community. And we're still struggling to convince others, that it is in many ways a different kind of essential function for our communities. And I feel like this is the moment to actually come together. Many of you watched as the governor pulled together his reopening committee, and we've talked about this on other calls. There was no representation, organizational representation of the arts and culture. We had many allies and many advocates on that committee, but didn't actually have a voice. And so we saw this as a moment to figure out how do we collectively go towards that, to the governor, and think about what is the aligned voice, and how important it will be for us to be present in as those decisions are being made. And naturally, we sort of had a bit of a fractured approach to that. And part of that is necessary. Yes, we all have individual needs, but I was certain that we had something that we shared that we could actually advocate and lobby together. So I feel like there's a moment to sort of look at what the ecosystem needs as far as our alignment, and then figure out how do we do that in a way that positions us better, that we're more powerful, our voice is stronger, and that we're actually engaging a wider swath of people because we are working more collaboratively together. So I remain hopeful that there's still that opportunity, and I'm committed to it, as are others as well. And so I feel like in this particular moment, this is an opportunity once again to figure out what that future can be as a very cohesive and collaborative ecosystem.
What he said.
Right, reinforced. So we've talked a little bit about that idea of rethinking collaboration, and that collaboration that word is coming up in all of our sort of pocketed conversations. Have you had the opportunity, is now the time to really tease out collaboration? What can it look like? And what's realistic in your thinking and for the larger community?
You know, for me, David, I'll give you a minute to think about that answer, and I'll just vamp.
Oh, you're good.
I think
that's teamwork. That's teamwork.
Yeah, he'll be smart. I'll be. I think part of the collaboration piece on this is to try to really get to the things that we absolutely share, that we actually, you know, what we have in complete common with one another, irrespective of whether we're museums or we're theaters or we're larger organizations or we have venues or we don't have venues. What do we have in common? And I heard Esther Nelson in that conversation that you were part of, Dawn, at the Boston Globe, and she said something that I thought was really powerful and needed to be really picked up for our community. And she said that one of the things that we missed when we shut down so fast and everybody went home was that we didn't take a moment to grieve. And the sense of loss and the sense of grief about how we were interrupted and all of the things we had in mind that will never happen, and all the relationships that were just getting started that now perhaps will never come to fruition, that every single person in this sector has some sense of loss there. And can we collaborate in some way to mark it? Can we grieve together before we come back? Can the community, and a member of our staff in this reimagination world, Akiva Abaka, was saying, you know, can we, when we open the theaters, can we just open them and have people schedule and come and sit alone quietly in the theater and have the moment of, I'm coming back, and feel it? Can we make a space for everybody to cross that threshold, like these kinds of events? And so they're not just about, can we collaborate on an ask for the governor? Can we, you know, make projects together? But what is our, I don't even know what you call it, what is the emotional process of recovery? And that we all share, regardless of our structure or our resources. And can we find ways to do that together?
Yeah. What he said. Yeah.
I am grateful to the two of you for all of this. I have one final question for you, which is my favorite question. And David Dower, I loved the way that you answered this question about what was it that you didn't know on March 10th, right? Like that was the week that you wish you had realized. And I'd love if you'd share those thoughts with all of us.
I think I've said this in so many places, and you know, some people tell me I should stop making fun of myself or stop revealing how bad I am at some of these things. But what was happening March 10th, let's all go back there for a second. David and I had, because we had a show that was about to open, and we had Parable of the Sower coming in 2 weeks. And so we had a meeting at 8:30 in the morning. This is going to take a little bit. It's a story, okay? It's not. We had a meeting at 8:30 in the morning, David and I, just on the phone, about we are going to keep going. Like, it's important to have a semblance of normal, and we're going to go in and go, and we're going to meet with the leadership of the, you know, all the team leaders at ArtsEmerson, and we're going to tell them that we are going to keep going, and it's going to remain normal. This is 8:30 on March 10th. So at 10 o'clock, we're in that meeting, and we say, and David's really inspiring, as you've noticed, and David's saying his best inspiring, it's going to be normal, and we're going to keep to normal. And the staff is looking at us like we have 6 heads. and you know, a great conversation ensues that really showed us that we had no idea what we were talking about. And so I went right from that meeting to a scheduled phone call with Toshi Regan. And I was getting on the call with the same sort of attitude, you know, like, Toshi, we are fighting for this show. We're going to keep this show, Parable of the Sower, which is about, you know, how a world puts itself back together after an apocalyptic environmental collapse. And she's like, okay, hear you, like the energy, good for you. But, you know, the show is actually saying to us directly, stop. And so maybe we should listen instead to the show that you want to do and stop. And in that conversation, those 2 conversations, what hit me like a brick in the face. I had two instincts for a moment like this, and they were both backwards. The first instinct was what we all have if you came up in the theater: the show must go on. Like that is, if you're a leader, the show must go on, no matter what. I was treating it like a weather event. If the T doesn't shut down, we're going to do it. And then the second thing, and it is a deeper and takes longer to explain, but I came up in San Francisco during the AIDS pandemic. And what we did there, our activism there, was to grab people and hold them as close as possible and say, me holding your hand will not kill me. Me sharing the bathroom will not kill me. I can kiss you on the mouth and I won't die. And so we were like holding each other as closely as we could. And the rage in my bones from all the people that I lost and all the years that we lived in that bleakness was so on fire in that moment. So I was doing two things. We're going to hold our audience as closely together as we can, and the show is going to go on. And thank God for Toshi, because she was just so plainly saying, or not. And the or not got through. So I came into David's office after that call. I was completely undone by my phone call with Toshi. And he was sitting at his desk completely undone by going through the notes of the earlier meeting. And at 2:00, we reassembled everybody on March 10th. And we said, oh, actually, no, we're going home. We're sending everybody home and we're closing the shows. And we'll figure it out from there.
Can I just say what I love about the story? And it really speaks to how we are leading. And it's, because again, David's sort of a moment, came directly from the artist, hearing directly from Toshi, being guided. We often talk about, the artists are our gatekeepers of the truth. They're civilization's radical voice. That's Paul Robeson who actually said that. And so hearing the truth of the artist, but also we started this conversation with prioritizing people, but also being able to hear and experience the energy of our staff in that moment. Yeah. In spite of our best instincts to sort of like, let's barrel ahead, being able to sit in that moment, me from the sort of cultural, human capital side, David from the artistic side, and we do both. But in this particular story, being able to then come together in the middle of the day and then do a course correction and say, yeah, we got that totally wrong. We hear you. You were right, we were wrong, and being able to make that course correction and being open and honest about that this is going to be our normal for a very long time. We're going to make decisions and assumptions in real time and understand that we're going to have to backpedal, and we're going to be forgiving, and we're going to offer grace in those moments, and we're going to clue you into why we made those decisions and why it was a bad or good decision along the way. And that has been the new normal. We have made and reversed several decisions since that March 10th day. And we will continue to make decisions and reverse decisions. And knowing that that can still be a good thing, right? That is not about bad leadership. That is about doing the best we can with all the information that we have in that moment. And thank goodness for a team that is adaptable, that's flexible, that believes enough in the vision and the mission to keep going and to trust and also the audience and the artists as well, is such a privilege. And so we are hopeful and sometimes like crazily optimistic in this moment, and so much to the point that we were talking, everyone knows, most of San San Wong, the Bar Foundation, that very first call after, we went into the stay-at-home order, she's like, how are you guys doing? We're like, we're great, it's gonna be fine. And she kind of was like, oh, okay, So a week later we had a call. We're like, well, she's like, well, I was wondering if you guys were okay because you were a little bit, optimistic. I'm like, well, so I do think we balance this sense of both the pain and the promise, and our tendency is to sort of lean into the promise, but we don't want to do that to the detriment of acknowledging incredible struggle that it is for so many of us as we navigate this. But again, still, there's a privilege in doing what we all do, in spite of the fact that it can be challenging and damaging, and particularly in this moment when it's so uncertain. But I will say to all of you, as I said to my team and myself, that we will return, we will reopen, and there will be theater, there will be music, there will be museums, and we will look back and hopefully we'll have learned something, throughout this process. So it's, we didn't know it on March 10th. We won't know it today. What is today, May 19th? By the way, someone told me Memorial Day was on Monday. Did you know? I had no idea. it's coming. But anyway, so it's been really an interesting journey, and the journey
It's Monday.
continues.
I don't actually remember a Monday. I've heard tell of such things, but
yes, there is a Monday. So anyway, shall we
my
keep
friends,
no.
always, always. I feel like these calls are my new like, hey, best buds. But like, right, this is also I think a place where I've been honored and privileged that StageSource could create a space where people could see each other, could share ideas, and hopefully like there are all the like sidebar conversations going on in the chat, all the private conversations where people are like, you said what? Can you explain? Can you go further on this? So that there is some kind of sense of community happening here. So yes, let us keep talking. But thank you, gentlemen. And let us now keep talking with Katie Most over at the Huntington. Hey, friend. Katie, can you unmute yourself, or do you need us to unmute you?
Go. Hello, everyone.
Hello. So friends, as you know, Katie is our manager and woman about town for the Calderwood Pavilion. And while the governor has released his sort of reopening plan, what he's thinking about and what he's prescribing, they're great ideas, but there are also the people who are in the buildings who know the audiences, who know what actually producing looks like. So I've asked Katie just to speak a little bit about some of the things that she is thinking about in terms of the pavilion. But knowing that, and I think we have said this in every conversation, things are always being reevaluated, things are pivoting, like none of this is gospel. It's just sort of like, here are the things we're looking at right now. Katie, my friend.
Yeah, hello everyone. Dawn, thank you so much for inviting me here to say hello. It is so wonderful to see so many of your faces. And really, you know, what Dawn and I had been chatting about is more questions than conversations, right? Yes, I run a venue, and I am not a source of information, but I both like that David said so eloquently put before, like I really believe that we need to come out of this together. I think our new normal most definitely is going to involve all of us figuring out what that path forward is to inviting people back into our spaces. And we have gone through plans and then thrown out plans and gone through plans and thrown out plans over and over again as we get more guidance. So of course, the new guidance we got yesterday, we are still digesting all of that information to try to figure out how and where we fit into that. Of course, sort of my organization at large is trying to figure out what we can be doing and how we can be engaging with people during this time in the digital world. But for me, you know, and I look at all of you, like my goal is trying to figure out like how and what we could use the space and how we can gather together again. I know that that is all really part of what we love doing. And how we can be available to all of you again, whether it's for meetings or for fundraisers, you know, or dance workshops, auditions, rehearsals. I think that so much of what we do really wasn't represented in that guidelines that we were given, and that we're going to have to really fight to figure out further. Because office space, like my office is in the Calderwood, but there's so much more that goes on there than that. So I just think we really do need to continue to make sure that our questions are heard and our voices are heard, to make sure that we're considered to be part of this new normal, and that we feel like, you know, that we're safely proceeding to start having people back into our spaces. You know, I really love your example of grief, especially when we did have to make that call that performances weren't going on in early March. I definitely know we've been sitting with that for a while. And so something that me and my team have been sort of talking about is sort of like the mental health aspects on the other side, right? We're all sitting at home, and when we're coming back together, my brain instantly goes to sort of the operations. Okay, how could we do this? How could we do that? Like, what are the steps? You know, my prior life was in stage management, so I think about creating a run sheet for front of house operations. But really, I feel like, you know, what's been most helpful is we've kind of stepped back even further from that and talked about the mental health aspects of our staff. you know, when we're coming up with trainings and guidelines, I feel like the conversation out of there of how do you feel about coming back to work? What are your anxieties? What are your, you know, how are we going to deal with the people even that are feeling really anxious? If somebody sneezes, if somebody, you know, isn't sort of, how do you feel comfortable back in this space? I know that the building, especially that we run, what I love most about it is it feels like it's a home for a lot of different organizations. And so we're leaving one home to try to come back into another, and how do we kind of make ourselves feel comfortable there? I know personally when I've sort of gone out, I keep coming back to like the restaurants. I don't know about you, but I've had to go get takeout from a few different restaurants, and I feel like some restaurants have figured out a really great way to make me feel safe and like I'm a priority, and how they have it sort of laid out. And I feel like I've been even stronger wanting to participate in their business. And I just hope for when theaters reopen, we can all kind of come together to find guidelines to make all of the community and patrons feel safe together, and we're not sort of parsed out. So I think that that's going to be a big topic for us to really dive into once we're able to get to that time.
Great. Sorry, I was taking notes. Like, I'm furiously, as everybody is speaking, taking notes as we go. I think that idea of how do we make the patrons feel safe, as well as how do we make the people that we're asking to come back into these spaces feel safe, it is super important, and will hopefully come together with something that I don't want to say works for all, because there's no one size fits all, but that
Right.
takes all of those things into consideration. Is there any one specific question, Katie, that like keeps coming top of mind as you're thinking about how to, I don't know, how to tackle that, making people feel safe, or at least know that like that your organization, that you guys are sort of looking out for them in the way that you were saying that the restaurants have found a way to make you feel comfortable? Is there something that keeps coming up for you?
To me, I mean, to me, it's like my front of house is going to have to run like the backstage of a musical. I think it's really about like sort of organization. But what also, you know, there was some interesting conversations from the TCG conference a week or two ago, and just about, are there ways that we can still feel that connectivity, even though we're sort of distance or have to stay apart? You know, I know so many people love coming into a lobby and seeing friends and seeing familiar faces, and wanting to engage in them in some way. So I think that we really also want to try to figure out how we can keep that underlying feeling of being able to connect to one another without with staying safe. Is really sort of where I'm trying to root myself.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge, I see, Pat, your comment about, we talk a lot about patrons, but how do we talk about the artists? And I will say, I am hearing a lot of people talk about the artists in pocketed conversations, and this might be something that is a topic for another one of these calls. I know there are also a bunch of other calls out in the community, but I think, and this also speaks to the point that I think both of the Davids were making, like, how are we thinking about people? And people includes more than just, right, the patrons. It's the folks that we're asking to come and work in the spaces, and what's going to make them feel comfortable, and what is going to let them know that we take, right, the health and safety of our community and the artists in this community seriously. So I think that'd be a great topic for another conversation. But also, if folks are tackling that right now, thinking about that, folks on the call, please put your thoughts in the chat, and we can tease those out. Katie, do you have anything else for us? Anything that you want to leave us with? Any parting thoughts?
No, I mean, just to touch on what you said in terms of I think that, yeah, our community is much bigger than the patrons, and we do have to start with our overhired technicians and our ushers and our administrative staff and our venue staff. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we're really trying to put our efforts right now. of taking these guidelines and how does that apply to us, and how does that apply to getting the work that we need to do first, you know, just in terms of even getting our scene shop in and out, sets up and down. How do people still feel safe, you know, because that, a lot of that can get thrown aside. So we're working through all of those questions right now. How do you share ladders? How do you share genies? I mean, there's so much that, like, also what's so hard is, like, so much of that is unseen and does go unnoticed, but yet that's where we have to start. So those are the first things we're going to have to figure out, because you need all those production elements. And, you know, it's a shame that a lot of our, not a shame, but you know, there are a lot of overhire staff out there that aren't either connected to an organization or things that I think we're going to need to think about, and also make sure that we're taking them into consideration and making them feel safe within the space. So, I mean, because we had guidelines and then we scrapped it. I would say anyone who is looking for somewhere to start with that, the event safety guidelines that were released a few weeks ago were a really helpful starting place for me, specifically considering about the facility and production work that has to happen within the space.
Excellent. Thanks, friends. So what I'd like to do, hey, Tracy, can you wave to the folks? We're coming up on, we've got 10 minutes left, and I would like Tracy Konopinski of Mass Creative to just say a couple of words on some of the advocacy and some of the new things that we need to be thinking about as we go through. Hey, Tracy.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to see and hear everyone. So Mass Creative, as a statewide arts advocacy organization, I think similar to ArtsEmerson, have said, you know, our mission, our values have been the same. How do we use this moment to work through that? So for Emily and I, we've really been thinking about how do we interpret all of the arts policy into action. That's what we've always done, and it's really what we're focusing on right now. So in terms of just the reopening, there is some positive stuff in there, and then there's some concerning stuff in there. And so we want to take that same lens of interpreting it and putting it into action. So I think hopefully most folks know that Emily and I and our team at Mass Creative host these 15-minute Friday policy and action updates. So it's like rapid fire. It's just, here's the most important policy, here's the most important advocacy action you can take to support the creative community. So hopefully folks know about those. And then we turn around on Monday to put that out in various communications, because we're taking this moment to say, yeah, lots of people learn in different ways. And so what's coming up for us is we're right now looking at the reopening guidelines. So the good parts in there is that there's a restaurant and tourism subcommittee that met over the weekend. So at least arts and tourism actually appear in the guidelines. I think a lot of folks will notice that it's in phase 3 and phase 4 that arts and entertainment and large venues start to be talked about. And then there's a section on sector-specific protocols and best practices, which I think are pretty impressive just in terms of interpreting the guidelines for specific sectors and saying, here are the guidelines, here's a checklist. We just need to make sure that the arts and cultural sector continues to be included and is used to inform those protocols and best practices. So if folks haven't looked at the mass.gov website, that is the Reopening Massachusetts website, I'm just gonna put it in the chat box. The other thing that I saw just this morning, kudos to the ArtsEmerson team for being interviewed and quoted, is the BUR Artery article about the 4-phase reopening plan and what it looks like for the arts community. So if you haven't seen that, in the chat box. So just in terms of what Mass Creative is focusing and recommending, there's 4 things. One is that we need clear discipline and venue-specific guidelines for reopening. so again, taking these guidelines, making them venue specific for all of the arts community, because our venues are also different, and being able to use the arts community to inform them. It's access to PPE, sanitation supplies, and contact tracing protocols. So we know that Boston is testing this, but people aren't answering their phones. And so how does that actually work if it's not working? And how do we, as excellent house managers and front of house, how do we help make that whole process better? And not me personally, obviously, collectively. The third thing is sustained financial support through the full reopening. So this is really challenging because we have leadership in the state and we want to ask them to fucking fund us. But the challenge is that all the money for emergency grants comes from the federal level. And so we're really trying to figure out how we push Congress to be more bold and use our state leadership to help make that happen. And then when the money does come here, does the arts have a role in what the emergency funds are going for on the state and municipal level? So lots of work needs to happen there. And then the last piece is really thinking about the future, that when we can safely reopen and have the protocols in place, how are we going to make people feel comfortable, like Katie said, coming back to venues? There's some people who are going to do it right and some people who are going to do it wrong, and it's going to make people feel uncomfortable. And so how do we coordinate a state and municipal messaging campaign to rebuild consumer confidence? And this is borrowed from what Toronto did after SARS in terms of bringing tourism back to the city. So what folks can look for later today, if you're not on Mass Creative's list, we invite you to join us. Things that are coming out later today is we'll do a little bit of interpretation on the reopening plan. We'll put out kind of what our recommendations are, and then there'll be an advocacy ask to call into Congress to say, hey, we just got our reopening plan. It's clear that the arts community does not appear until phase 3 or 4. We need emergency funds, include us. And then for folks who know about this, Congressman McGovern is holding a town hall with Mass Cultural Council tomorrow. And so we're also encouraging folks to go to that. And then the last thing that I'll just end with is that I have also been really thinking about the organizing tenet that David Dower talked about, the hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And so I think that is exactly what we're trying to do. And as we look at, kind of Mass Creative's business model, how do we reinterpret that and reinvent it, and then support the creative community in doing the same?
Thank you so much, Tracy. Do you have information on that town hall for tomorrow? Do you know if it's on the MCC?
I will put it in the box.
If you would. Great. So I'm going to try to vamp unsuccessfully for a few seconds while Tracy puts that in the chat. Otherwise, that is our conversation for today. I will try to put together a conversation about how we are trying to take care of the artists and independent contractors that we are asking to come back and start doing the work. I think that's it for our next conversation. Tracy, any chance you have it? Otherwise, if you want to send it to me, I can send it out to the group. Oh, Margaret Ann Brady for the win. It is in the chat, friends. Do your thing, save the chat. You can get all these great thoughts and ideas and keep them for yourselves. That is it for us for this week. We'll be back next week with a new conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Tracy. We appreciate you. Bye, everyone. Stay healthy.